Yeah, we're speaking of which, we all agree Avi has the best podcast voice, right, guys?
This is the compliment that's going to make my week. I'm so happy.
Hey,
Nothing else matters as long as you look
Nope.
good on the pod. Okay, welcome back to episode 5. I can't believe I'm saying those words. Episode 5 of Product Champs. This week, Samir and I are going to speak into the mic and enunciate and speak
That's right.
slower. And
That's right.
And we're going to have a great pod. So this is Product Champs, our weekly get together to talk about careers, product, and life. Not in that order, but those 3 topics. Just as a quick recap, last week we talked about our personal journeys into product land. It's a great pod. I went back and listened to actually a bunch of it. Actually, my wife, just for reference, went back and listened to some of it, and she thought it was highly entertaining. She was like, "Why didn't you tell me any of this stuff?" I was like, I didn't have a good answer to that question, actually. But by the way, I just want to call out one thing before we dive into this pod, which is one thing I noticed in last pod and many of our pods that I think we do well, and I want to encourage the 4 of us to continue doing, is that we're not super prescriptive. You know what I mean? Like the answers we give aren't like, "Hey, here's the 1, 2, 3, and then you're a PM."
right.
Like
Right.
they're like we kind of boil them down, but it's not like Google Maps. It's like, follow these instructions, you will become a PM. It's like, here's a compass, and like the moss grows on the north side of trees. The wind is usually coming, it's like,
Only DZ can.
you know what I'm saying?
I like it. I like it. I like it. I
But
like
it's
it.
I
real.
think that
It's
reflects
real,
reality.
right?
Yeah, I think that's actually the right advice.
It is.
Yeah.
And I got this comment from someone, I think on LinkedIn, about how the content we're creating is just meaningfully different. We just sound different. The way we talk about it is different. We're not like cookie cutter, follow this listicle and then you'll be okay. We're kind of warts and all. So
Right, which is why, DZ, we didn't tell anyone to like, subscribe, and hit
we would never do such
the bell
a thing.
icon.
No,
but Avi, if they wanted to like,
If they
subscribe and hit
wanted
the bell
to,
icon,
That'd
Yeah.
be fantastic.
right?
Speaking of which, I want to bring up something really terrible that happened this week. We got our first dislike.
Oh, that's true.
Ooh,
Yeah, which
oh,
whoever is out there that is the disliker,
I know who you are.
That's okay.
yeah, it's
I think
okay.
that's
feel-
okay.
It's okay. We love
Yeah.
feedback.
I feel
Yeah.
emboldened, like if we're not polarizing, we're not doing this right. Like that's
That's fair.
You know what I thought, right? I thought it was just an accidental mouse move before the click. Sometimes that happens, right? Like you want to hit the like button, but then
true. It's the
You know,
bots.
it must
Yeah,
have
the
been.
bots
That's what I
want to keep
thought.
it.
that's
Okay.
what I thought. Yeah.
All right, let's jump in. So quick intro. I'm DZ. I'm a PM at LinkedIn. You guys.
I'm Avi. I'm a PM at YouTube.
I'm Samir.
That's it.
I'm Samir.
Wait, did
I'm a
something
product
happen?
manager.
Oh,
No,
now
no,
I'm curious.
I'm still at Pinterest,
Okay.
but the point is, I'm Samir.
Okay.
And I'm a product manager.
That's
Yeah.
fair.
There you go. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ahmad, you're Ahmad.
Hi guys, my name's Ahmad. I'm a PM at a firm.
Oh, that was a proper intro. Okay, so the topic last week was how to become a product manager. A very rosy topic, right? Because it's a hero story. We all start in the weeds, and we somehow end up being product managers to this journey. And so we thought we'd keep it real and balance it out and talk about the opposite and talk about failures. I think, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we want to talk about is why do products fail and how do products fail? And similar and true to our spirit of these things, the way we're going to sort of get into this topic is by sharing our personal failures in product land, right? The things that we thought didn't go the way we wanted them to go. So before we dive into the stories, just a bit of context setting. So we're going to have this conversation in a way that's helpful for everyone. What do we mean by product failure? Like what in your head constitutes a product failure?
Yeah, that's a really good one. Ahmad, you seem like you wanted to go. Do you want to go?
No, I have to think about that one. That's
Okay.
Unprepared. Okay, look, I'll tell
I'm
you.
unprepared. No, you gave us a question and then you hit us with a different question, which was
I
more
know. I wanted a
philosophical.
genuine response. That's
Yeah.
what this pod is about.
Yeah,
Avi, why don't you go? Avi,
Okay, I have a couple of thoughts. So
Okay.
one, I would say something that never finds product market fit,
Mm,
that keeps getting built anyway.
okay.
Ooh.
I think that's one example.
Okay.
One that I've personally done a couple of times now, and that I think it made me a better PM, but I realized the mistake in retrospect. And I think I talked about this in a previous pod, is finding a solution that's looking for a problem.
Mhm.
Right. So oftentimes this has come in the form of having some interesting technology. This often happens with like at Disney. This happened with like AR and VR to me, where like, very interesting technology, possibly too early for its time, and you start building a product when there's no real problem to solve. So I'd say like those are probably the two best examples I've seen of building bad products.
Okay.
Yeah, what you said reminded me of something. Like while you were saying it, it sort of came to my mind that people don't always admit when products fail. Like there's a lot of products that are actually fail,
Yeah.
Oh,
right?
definitely not.
It reminded me of something Peter Thiel said, where he talks about competition. Like they're on all his talks. Like there's many talks where he gives, but it was actually really interesting. He talks about like monopolies, and he said, if you're a monopoly, you're not going to admit you're a monopoly.
Mhm.
You're going to make all these other categories where you think, you're relevant, and so you like write it off. Basically, you
Yeah.
justify it away. And if you're just a commodity, then you want to like differentiate and claim that you are a monopoly because you're so important. And that basically is the same as this, Abby, which is a lot of people don't necessarily admit when there's failure. They justify the success in some way.
Or they excuse it, right? They say,
Or they
hey, it
excuse
wasn't
it.
me, it wasn't
Yeah.
the product, it
Yeah.
was, whatever. I think there's some layman's definitions. Just want to like throw out the simple ones. Like a simple layman's definition is you spend a lot of money and time and energy, you launched,
Yeah.
and nobody cares, right? Nothing
Right.
happens,
Yeah.
right? That's
Yes.
the
Nothing
classic
happens.
product failure,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
Another variation of that. I mean, again, we're gonna make this real and talk about our own lives, no matter how uncomfortable this gets. But another variation of that is you figure that out very late. In other words, like looking back on some of the examples I'm gonna walk through, like I realized I could have figured out way earlier this thing was gonna fail. The signs were there, the signals were there, the data was there.
Yeah.
I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't adamant or what have you. And we let it slide, and a year later it failed, right? But like the failure wasn't at the end. The failure was like a year before that, when I could have made the call to do something different or to change it or to whatever, and I didn't. So that's another kind of generalized example. Should we, Ahmad?
So-
Do we give an answer? Do you want to give a thought here?
Yeah. So, I'm realizing now that I think it might have. This actually would have been a great episode to have our first guest, because we all know someone. I don't know if TZ and Samir, you know this person deeply, but who just started at Shopify, and he was telling me that Shopify has a great PM culture, celebrates their failures. He said there's a digital wall essentially that lists out all of the failures that they've done as an organization and rewards them, and it sort of celebrates them for all the things that they've taught Shopify. And honestly, I think that's a very good and healthy relationship with failure. And as you were talking, I was thinking, like, honestly, like, I think a product, or as a PM, you've truly failed if the product does bad and you didn't learn anything. I think if the product does bad and you learn something, I think you can actually call that a success as a PM and as a team. But I think what happens is if you ignore that failure and you continue to go down that wrong path and you have a flop.
Oh, very meta.
Right.
Yeah.
Love it. I hear this at LinkedIn a lot too, by the way. Although we don't necessarily practice it, which is you don't win or lose. I'm not winning or losing. All I'm doing is learning. Okay. With that being said, let's get into the stories. I'll lead off since I brought up this topic with at least one story, and then let's hear a few more, and then let's do the same thing we did last time, which is like let's talk about the generalizableness of some of these ideas. Okay. So just to pick up on the story I shared last time about my personal journey to product. Remember, I was a consultant working with mainly retailers, restaurants, banks. Living in SF, I wanted to transition to tech. The one thing I didn't share was there was a transition in the middle, right? It wasn't like, leave consulting, join LinkedIn as data scientist. There was like a 6-9 month period. I can't remember that exactly. I think it was like 9 months period in the middle, where I was like, hey, I should build a company. I should do something, right? And figure something out. And so, true to some of the things we talked about before, the thing I was personally adjacent to, meaning I had a lot of knowledge about, or at least I was close to, was retail, right? I just spent all this time working with, Target, working with Walmart, working with Radio Shack, all these different retailers. And I felt like, well, if I have any advantages in the world right now, it's like I'm maybe understand retail a little bit better. By the way, this is like around this is early 2010s, right? And so physical retail is just getting hammered. I mean, it's still getting hammered, but like, the inflection point was getting really serious. Everyone felt it was a bit of a death spiral. And so, all of these sob stories about the end of retail. And my observation was that every time I went to like a Home Depot is a good example, Walmart's another good example, which is not that often by this point, right? Remember, Amazon's working pretty well. But every time I went to one of these physical stores, the most frustrating thing for me was I couldn't find anything. Right? The store is massive. I don't go there that often, maybe once every month, once every 2 months. I can't find anything. It's super frustrating. I was like, what I really want.
Also, you feel stupid when you can't find something. You're
I feel stupid when I can't find something.
Where is this? Yes.
Super, negative. I was like, okay, that, let's clue into that pain, right? The pain of person walks into a store, they're looking for X, they don't know where the hell it is. It's 100,000 square feet. You can't find people anymore, right? Remember that at this point, retail stores are staffing down, and often their staff is less well trained. So, finding a person is actually quite difficult. Okay, so I thought to myself, hey, what could we do here? And it was the basic idea was an on shopping cart device that you could press and ask a question. Hey, where are the drills? Aisle 17, right? That was it. That was the whole idea, right? And maybe it's a smart device. I mean, the smart devices are getting cheaper this time. Maybe it's literally what I just said. It's a speaker and microphone. And so as I was going through the motions of this, we actually went to a Target. This is such a crazy story. We went to a Target, stood outside the Target, and handed. It was a very complicated spiel. I couldn't pitch this very well. Handed a walkie-talkie to people walking this. We told them what's going on here. We're trying out this idea. We would hand them a walkie-talkie and say, hey, if you're in the store and you can't find something, press the button and say, where is lettuce? And we'll respond. And before, we had done this, we had walked around the store and cataloged everything, right? And said, basically we knew every aisle for every item. And so
this is awesome, by the way.
This is MVP.
This is amazing.
By the way, it sounds like your consulting jobs were way more fun than anything I've heard as like you being a PM. Like these sounded great. Like
why did you even leave?
Yeah, seriously. Like that sounds like you're just hating walkie-talkies.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that part.
Keep going.
We'll get to that in a second. I mean, one of the reasons, by the way, is like it's really about optimization, right? Like one of my clients was Radio Shack, and like you cannot optimize your way out of the fate that Radio Shack was facing. Anyway, so we tried this thing and we struggle, and we're putting together pitches, and I'm starting to meet with this is again early 2010s. I'm starting to meet with people to raise capital. I talked to a lawyer, blah blah blah, and eventually just peters out. I talked to some small business users. The initial reception of that test wasn't great. When you talk to people, it wasn't great. And so what I realized after the fact, I mean, this is like far, and basically what really happened was I just kind of lost enthusiasm, right? I realized I didn't really understand product very well. I didn't really understand product, like how to figure out a product at all. I was just stumbling through it. And eventually I just lost enthusiasm, and it sort of petered out, and I found a job, and, I got back to product, but, it took me a while longer. The insight I had, the product insight I had after the fact, that I didn't have in going into this. I don't begrudge the test, by the way. It's a good test, right? Was that really, if you think about the population that shops, they kind of bifurcate very cleanly. So if you don't want to shop in a store, the solution for you isn't a device in a shopping cart that tells you where the lettuce is. The solution for you is called Amazon Prime, right? That's the right solution to the problem. And for the people that shop in the store, they enjoy going to the store. They go to the store once a week. There's a large population that still does this. They don't care about your device because they enjoy the walking around the store once a week. I see my stuff. I see what's new. I talk to the barista, right? And so if you think about the population of people that are going to buy stuff, the population in the middle where I want to go to a store versus I just want to get it delivered to me, is so small, vanishingly small, that this is, again, kind of not a problem, right? Like it is a problem in my head, but in reality, people have solved it in two ways. And you're basically chasing a population that doesn't exist.
I think that is a genius story. Like very insightful, a lot to sort of pick up on there. I think what you touched on is this, it's a very complicated art to understand if a problem is a real problem.
Totally.
And while it is a problem, I mean, by definition, this is a problem. Like, I don't know what's on what aisle. Is it big enough to be solved? Not from a, are there enough humans that you could help, but also like from a psychology perspective, is this aligned with human behavior, right? Like, if I have this problem, is this the solution I'm going to seek out, or is it online shopping? And you know, and if I enjoy going to a store, efficiency really isn't my thing. You know,
Exactly right.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. That's,
Or maybe I don't want to be like talking into a device, right?
right.
And there were some other things bad too. I mean, I'll just call them out to complete the learning here, which was the other issue was that the stores were also very bifurcated, right? So, you know, you have these very large big box stores, Targets and Walmarts, where this might actually be useful, but they're so slow. And what, you know, one of the reasons they're in trouble or were in trouble is they're so slow moving that, like, I flew to Minneapolis. I tried to get meetings with executives at Target. I had some connections. They didn't pan out. But, you know, it's just like so slow moving that they're kind of suicide in general for startups. It just takes too long to get something going with a large big box. Then on the other hand, you have a lot of mom and pops, right? And again, but they don't want technology to mediate the relationship either. They want to be, they want to be the Samir, the guy that you go to buy, whatever specialty, he or she's in charge of. So on the store side as well, you know, you have this problem of like, who are you really catering to, and who is like desperate for this solution. Anyhow, my first attempt, my first swing, my first failure. Actually, maybe not my first attempt. That menu thing actually worked out. So the first attempt worked, but the second attempt on my own, swing and a miss. And to Ahmad's point, I got a lot out of that experience in retrospect, and so I don't begrudge it. I thought it was maybe not time well spent, but it was worth the pain.
I think there's some really good points there, DZ, which is one, I loved how you tested the idea, right? I think you came back to the principles we discussed 2 pods ago, which is what's an easy way to see if this works and fails quickly. So like the walkie-talkie idea, the idea of, can you stand this up overnight and see if it holds up, is really, really interesting. I think your point also about the dependencies and any idea, and working in organizations that are naturally slow, organizations that don't want to change. I think, at least in the stories that I'm thinking of, there are similar themes there. And it makes building a product really, really difficult.
Okay.
So
yes.
2 things.
Yes. Agree.
Two things as well. Yeah. I love the prototype. I think, that as a prototype is something I always dream of like, can I solve this problem in a way where like I basically buy a walkie-talkie and test it?
Literally, this was the solution.
I think it's
I still
beautiful.
have the walkie-talkies, by the way. There's some in my garage somewhere.
I honestly, sometimes I wish I could think of an easy prototype. Like sometimes finding a prototype is a hard thing to do. Is like, how do I prototype this in a way that maps? But there are 2 things that came up while you were talking that I thought were potentially interesting. One is I think even in the problem that you described, where like, hey, I'm looking for this thing, there's also 2 segments or 2 flavors of the problem. It's like, hey, I am looking for this type of gift for my daughter. Like, needs to check these sort of boxes. And you actually need a human, I think, in that approach. So you would prefer someone who like walks you through the aisle, understands that, well, are you looking for this? Are you looking for that? And I think it only, the solution you described only really works if like, I know what I want is like this exact thing, and I'm just looking for it in the store.
Yeah.
And the last thing is, I actually think stores might like, and this is my perspective, DZ, I'd be curious to hear, working with these companies, but like, I think they actually want you to get lost in the store. Like, I think by getting lost in the store, you stumble into more stuff, you buy more shit. So the incentives aren't aligned.
For a long time. I mean, it's only been recently, I think Walmart came out with an in-store app like 3 years ago or something, way after you'd expect that they would have this, right? I think for a long time, they resisted any in-store technology because, to what you just said, Ahmad, like they thought of the store as an experience, right? And the experience involved shelves and serendipity and people, arguably for a lot of people, myself included, not a great experience, but like the executives and the quote unquote product managers, right? In a retail company, the product manager would be the person in charge of in-store design, basically, right? So the product managers for this store, we're thinking about the solution a very different way, and therefore your little idea doesn't really fit into their worldview of like what they're trying to achieve.
By the way, I think. Oh, go ahead, Samir.
No, I was basically building on what the both of you said. This idea of worldview is super important because at some point you probably pitch the store, and they have, for lack of a better word, a revenue equation or a value equation, right? That's like time spent times, some like dollars per time spent sort of thing, where they arrive at a revenue number, which to Ahmad's point, the more lost they get, the more opportunity they have to find something else that they would buy, which is also why you hear about people keeping things that people sort of share baskets with, that like opposite ends of the stores, because there's that journey to get
put the milk at the back, right? That's
milk, exactly.
Everyone knows the strategy, right?
Right. So there's all these like, to go back to the topic of the pod, one of the reasons products fail is because they fail to map cleanly to an accretive value of an equation that someone's got, where they think more of this is better, right?
Yes.
We at the end of the day,
Ahmad, go ahead, Ahmad.
Like at the end of the day, just kind of like take that, what you said, Samir, and make it applicable here. Like any problem that DZ could have solved, it needs to add value to Target in order for Target to actually want to invest. If it's only solving problems for the consumer here, why would Target actually want to do it?
Yeah.
And one other thing you said, DZ, that before we kind of change topics here is, I do think stores nowadays, like in stores, like I think you should, if someone got off their lazy ass, you can literally order a car. There's a company like Carveouts. You could literally order a car to your house without like lifting a finger. I guess, lifting one finger. And if someone gets off their ass to come into your store, if I'm an owner of that store, I would be thinking today, how do I actually make this experience for this person in the store so delightful that they actually were willing to get off their ass again?
I think this is such a good point, because like to Samir's point about worldview, I think if you're a smart PM at a big box retailer today, you start to realize that your only advantage is actually an efficient store experience, right? That you can actually go to Target and get something right now, whereas on Amazon, you're going to have to wait, at least 4 hours, if not a full day.
But like, let's pull on that further, right? So again, if that's the problem to solve, then the solution isn't walk into the store and ask the shopping cart, where is the lettuce, right?
Yes.
The solution is sit in your car and somebody bring it to you, right?
Which is what COVID forced, right?
The diagnosis even. By the way, there's a variation of this. This is the last point, and then we should let's hear more stories. I think these stories are all very help us have this conversation. One thing the four of us have actually talked about in other contexts, but it extends from this concept of worldview, and when you violate worldview, your product will fail. Is we've quipped before that if my product requires you to reorg to use my product will fail, right? Like, and this is kind of more of an enterprisey lens on the thing, right? Like, if you had to change your reporting structure to get value of this thing, your product's already dead. And that's the enterprise version of this consumer problem of like, this doesn't map to how people think.
Totally.
Which is, subtle and hard to figure out. Okay.
By the way, sorry.
Go.
That's a very insightful. I just wanted to add one story about this. When we were at YouTube, basically building products for video ads, a lot of it came down to fitting the product to the worldview of a TV buyer.
Totally.
And
Which is a
every
strange
time,
worldview.
right? Every time, I mean, a lot of the innovations were genuinely novel, different format innovations, targeting innovations, et cetera, et cetera. But if they didn't align to the language and the mental model of the TV buyer, there was so much friction in adoption. And to the point of reorg, a lot of things were, well, you need your digital buyer to go and do XYZ, but that's a different org than the TV buyer.
That's right.
And that's why we spent a lot of time building tools that would bridge that gap, because we didn't want the users to have to go and talk to someone from another org, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a very valid point in terms of, why
somebody should go
products
deep.
fail.
I mean, Samir, do you want to go deep
Yeah.
on one of those examples? Somebody should pick apart one of those. Who wants to go next? Who's up?
I think Avi or Ahmad should go next.
I like how you punted it.
Ahmad, you got one?
I kind of maybe. Honestly, why don't you go and then
Okay, we'll come back to
if
you.
you have
Ahmad.
a
Okay,
I'll
go.
go with
Oh,
mine.
that's good.
So my biggest product failure to date is also my favorite product of all time. So these two go hand in hand for me. It's a product called DigiBoom. So when I first started at Disney in the R&D department, there was this project that had kind of been sitting around for a while, but it had this whole lore to it, and I kind of caught on to the lore and began to love it. It was this project that was started. Let me think of the story. So it was started because at the Oscars at Disney, ABC filmed the Oscars, and there's only so much space on the red carpet.
Huh.
And this forced all these reporters and camera people to stand side by side on the red carpet and get the same shot over and over again. So as you scrolled through different networks, you're essentially seeing the same maybe pan, if not like a lockdown shot, which is visually very boring. And what you actually want is these really dynamic crane-like shots that you would see on ESPN. And so the original charge was, how can you get really dynamic crane-like shots in a very small space? And the project was taken on by this really incredible Disney Imagineer. And he had taken it from he was like a very, he had worked on like fighter jets at one point, was like a PhD multiple times over, and had taken on this project and had built a 3-axis gimbal that you essentially put on the end of a stick. And so you're able to hold out the stick, put a camera on the end, hold it up high, and simulate these crane-like shots. And it was incredible. It was like really did solve the problem. And over time, we got to the point where it performed really well. And so I picked the project up. No, it had really gone nowhere. Nobody was using it, but there was a really incredible technology here. And I did what I think any good PM should do, which is I said, okay, we're Disney. The one thing we have access to is like a lot of camera people, right? So we have ABC News, we have ESPN, we have like all of these
Unfair
news
advantages,
outlets.
yeah.
Yeah, like let's go talk to them, right? Like, let's go see what they would want out of this camera. And the mistake that I made was, although they appreciated the idea, right? Although they thought it was interesting, and I think this goes to the point of reorgs, I was having to sell them on the idea, right? So they gave me good advice, they gave me good insights, but none of them wanted to change the way they did things. They had been trained one way. They didn't want to have to learn new technology. They needed something that worked the first time around, right? If you're live on air and you don't have time to innovate, right? The first time the shot goes wrong, the director never comes back to you. So like the risk for them was very high. And although like we got the product to a really, really good point and we launched the product, I didn't have the insight at the time to realize that like the fact that I was having to sell them on using this to convince them to use it, instead of them banging down my door to want to use this thing, meant that I had gone wrong, right? So I think, to Samir's framework from a couple of weeks ago, I think I had stumbled across a vitamin and not a painkiller, right? So like they were giving me good insights about the vitamin that, this was, there was a problem here. I was making things better, but it wasn't painful enough that they would throw away all their training or take the risk of making a shot look slightly bad on air. And so, yeah, it was a product that like, although we launched it and like we're able to partner with a manufacturer, this awesome company called Red Rock Micro, it never quite found that product market fit. And it was something I should have realized in that interview stage where like, instead of selling people, they should have been, when can I get the first unit? Like, how soon can I use this? Let me get on air right away. And it's something I now look for intently with products, right? If that's not there, I know there's a bad sign.
It's interesting your point, Avi, and I think this will be something we should talk about some more. Your point of like, you using your product for that target user, for that specific target user segment, using your product made them feel vulnerable. Maybe made them feel stupid, right? Or there's some risk involved that wasn't there before. I guess another way to ask the question would be like, if you hadn't gone after these like established camera operator people, with the history and the pedigree and such, and you'd have gone after like the YouTube creator crowd,
totally,
would that have been a totally different story? Because they have the opposite problem, right?
Yes,
they need the splashy splash to get the attention.
And it's interesting because when you start dealing, like, this is one of the few hardware products I've built. But when you get into the world of hardware products, you start to realize that there's a real cost to the components, right? So if you're building this thing and you can only get the cost so low, you naturally start picking your user segment, right? So can YouTubers afford this? Or is this something that has to be purchased at a professional level, right? So sometimes, unlike the software world, where you can kind of say, well, who's the best user, right? Every incremental unit doesn't necessarily cost more. We can determine our price point. In the hardware world, you're kind of bound to say either we sacrifice on performance or the minimum cost is X. And so I think you're right, Easy. Like, I think there's probably a better fit there. But I don't know if we could have gotten the base cost low enough for them.
Yeah. You have these constraints that are hard to work around.
Yeah.
Samir, Ahmad, thoughts?
I like the hardware part of this. I think, one of the challenges you've identified is access.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big theme for why products fail. Often we think about price as being a barrier to adoption. We think about, availability, like I can't find it in this country, or we didn't launch it in market X, as a barrier to adoption. And some of these barrier to adoptions can systemically be, worked on over time, reduced over time, via product innovations, via just launching stuff. And sometimes you're just blocked on hardware or some sort of natural force. Maybe it's also law, right? Like international law of like shipping something somewhere or whatever. And so going back to the topic of the podcast, like one of the reasons products fail is it's infeasible to access the product for a lot of people. And then of course, like if you think about that, like, perhaps if you had this, trial program for YouTubers where they could get, or even the camera folks, where it's like, try it out. It's kind of like a freemium thing.
Yeah.
Right. If you like the output, then pay, or it's pay per use or whatever, which is where a lot of the, I would say, trial, freemium, et cetera, strategies have come in. Mm-hmm. And if you think about why those innovations have come in, it's really to improve access. People want to try before they buy and get value out of it before they make. But price is just one element of access. I think access is the broader theme here that I picked up from your story. Sometimes it's a matter of shipping software, and sometimes it's a matter of hardware, which is a lot more difficult. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point.
What? Just one other thought that your idea triggered for me was, like, so it's interesting. Like, actually, one other thing I like about our pod, by the way, is like whenever I'm telling a story, I think I'm telling story A, and then you guys say, no, the story is actually about B. I was like, oh, okay. So like your story, Avi, you thought your story was, hey, my product was, the way you framed your story was, hey, this is not a pain, this is a vitamin, right?
Yeah.
And so you're saying that the problem is not a good problem, right? You're saying the solution is great, but the problem is not the right problem. I think you can make the counter argument, so like how would you so imagine the problem is I need dynamic engaging shots.
Yeah.
Writ large, right? how would you ship a solution to that at a low enough price point that could be consumery, so to speak? So you could go after this segment of creators, right? That solution would look more like a drone or something.
Yeah,
Would it?
I
Right,
think
so, like-
you're exactly right, DZ, which is DJI, the drone company,
Yeah.
actually started shipping this, right? So
Yes.
they made a smaller version of this that relied on the same gimbal technology. So
Yeah.
I think it's a very good point, right? Where
Right. The problem is real
Yeah.
though. Like, so
Yes.
I guess both answers can, like, they didn't work, but like the
Yes.
point is, like, you could argue why, like, changing either equation could
Yeah.
make it work. It actually reminds me of one of the stories we told before or one of the conversations we had before about Uber versus Zipcar. They're both going after the same problem. It so happens that Zipcar's timing was bad. They're pre-iPhone and they were pre-mobile. And so they solved it a certain way. But, like, arguably for their time, that was the right solution, right? But now there's a much radically better solution. So anyhow, a great story though. I mean, one that I think we can pull a lot out of.
Yeah, if you guys get a chance, you have to go look at the product. It's pretty amazing.
We'll put it in the show notes.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Okay, Samir, enlighten us. Tell us.
Okay,
cool. Can I add one thing, Samir?
Oh, yeah,
before-
come on.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Because I actually read something recently in a book called Originals by Adam Grant. Have you guys read this book?
I'm not.
No.
Incredible book. I highly recommend. There's a quote in there about Steve Jobs saying there's this guy he had, like, I think he held the record for, like, the third most patents ever, to ever be held. And he invented this product that showed Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs said, "This is the most innovative thing I've ever seen. This product is going to change the way the world works." Does anybody know what that product is?
Was it that Segway thing?
It was a Segway.
It was a
Yes.
Segway.
It was a Segway. And there was so much hype about this. And the reason why it failed is because people didn't look at some of the practicality of, like, how am I going to charge this thing? Where am I going to store this thing? It's $10,000. Like, is this really, like, worth it? And so sometimes you get so focused at solving the problem that you forget to think about the ways it's, like, the problem surfaces
Yeah.
to the consumer.
Yeah.
Also,
The
walking's not
context.
that bad,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's a great. We should do a case study on some of these kind of very public outright failures. We could pick apart ones from Google at some point. There's been many famous ones. I think there's learnings to be had all around. But this
I think-
podcast, we start personal.
One quick point just to follow to Ahmad's, like, I think Segway, you could argue, like, the same thing, with the two companies you referenced, Easy. The better version of Segway was Bird,
Yeah, totally.
right? So, like,
Yes.
same problem, like, walking does kind of suck.
That's right.
But
But
like,
it's $300.
was-
right?
exactly, but it's a wrong way to solve it.
And you're balancing it, but you're pretty good at balancing, actually. Humans
Yeah,
are pretty good at
balancing is
balancing.
not the problem, right? Yeah, but like, I think that the idea that, like, that last mile problem is truly a problem.
Yeah.
But it just wasn't the right way to solve the problem.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yep. I
Okay.
Go ahead, Samir.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I think I was
You
going
guys
to
are
say,
trying
I think
to pass the buck to each other for the last 30 minutes.
No,
I think-
I'm happy.
That's because they've never failed.
They've
I
never,
think
Ahmad just
I think-
drops bombs. That's all he does. Just everything's success. No failures to speak of. Samir, go
Okay,
for it.
so-
Samir, be the bigger person.
Okay, well,
Go for it.
actually, I have too many failures to count. But what I wanted to do was give people a practical answer on why products fail or how products fail. And there's sort of two things I want to touch on. The first is actually kind of nicely, it's a good segue from the previous story, which is about neglecting the go-to-market side of things. And so if you think about, okay, have you understood the product, the problem? Have you understood the user? Can you get over the constraints, et cetera, and you build it, there's often this expectation that they will come, right? And when, going back to DZ's original point, one simple definition is you build it and no one comes. And so that missing link is what I wanted to touch on. It's, often it has different names at different companies, but it's often go to market. And go to market is actually one of the reasons products succeed a lot, but neglecting it from a product standpoint, often leads to failure. So I think, what do I mean by go to market? I mean, is your product able to be found online, or wherever people, buyers are actually looking for that solution? Do people selling your solution understand it? Is there, the sales training part of it? Now, at large companies, these are separate functions and you'll get great help at this, but a lot of people are doing this themselves, or at smaller companies without fully built teams. The idea of, I need to write something that can train a salesperson on how to sell it, is often the difference between whether they're going to invest the time to sell this versus the 5 or 10 other things they have to do with their customers. If you think about, I would say Ahmad touched on this, the context in which people experience the product, serviceability, for example. These are things that, are not often requirements we think about in a product requirements document, but I would say the outer edges of what product managers care about typically. And if you neglect them, they can fail. So I think go to market is a big part of
Totally.
Why products fail, or not having a good go to market strategy. We've partnered with our go to market counterparts at Google, and I've certainly been very lucky in all the counterparts I've had. I feel like whenever there's a successful product, it's because they do more than their fair share to make sure that it's a success in the field, quote unquote. But when we don't think of that, it's a failure.
I do think your call that is not symmetrical is correct. Like it's very noticeable when it's deficient, right?
Yeah.
And then when it's there, you sort of take it for granted. You're like, wow, the product was awesome. That's why people love it, right? And it's not. Exactly. It's not just. I want to sort of build on that point you're making, which is there's strategic aspects to it, which is who you go after and what channels and what's the kind of storyline and so on and so forth, and those matter. But then there's also very, very tactical things. And I know the one superpower, I had this PMM, shout out to Ryan, who left LinkedIn, was fantastic. But the very tactical thing is just the words, just the copy. It's unbelievable how much difference copy makes. And it's like a superpower we don't celebrate enough. I feel like if you can write copy and you can write SQL, you can like take over the world at this point.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
But it's so subtle, and it's like little word differences and context differences and phrasing differences makes really unbelievable amounts of difference.
There's a second part to my thing, but Ahmad, you want to?
Yeah, so I was
talk
going to
more about this.
Opposite to, or I think it builds on DZ's point. And if we ever talk about companies that did build great products, even though they may not work, like something like Honey. I don't know if you guys have ever used Honey. Honey's, in my opinion, never worked for me.
Wait, what is Honey?
It gives coupons when you check out, right?
It's a Chrome extension. It's a Chrome extension that every time you check out, it scavenges the internet for you for promo codes and just starts slamming through promo codes before you check out. And something that they do that's really, really smart is that they pick their copy very carefully. If you guys ever go look through it, they say basically something along the lines like, there are no better promo codes out there, or like no better, like basically you're not going to find something better than this is essentially what they're saying. Which even though it's like, it only works, let's say 5% of the time, you feel like it was a success because the way it was communicated to you is that you're not going to find, we couldn't find anything, so you're not going to find anything. You can make this, like, I think they even say like you can make this purchase without remorse or something like that.
Ooh,
smart. So, that's such a good way to frame it, right?
Yeah.
Frame the negative as a positive.
Yeah,
that's right. By the way, speaking of copy, I was once using this like shampoo with some whatever, like gym, and it was like something moisturizing shampoo, and then it was like twice the moisture or whatever, right? And then it had this asterisk beside it. And of course I was like, oh, twice the moisture. It must be like really moisturizing. And then I looked behind the bottle and it was like, when compared to the average non-moisturizing shampoo. And I was like, wait a minute. if it's only got twice as much as the one that's got almost nothing, doesn't really have anything. But most
2
people
times
don't
0,
read
0. You know,
Two
the
times
math checks
zero,
out.
zero, yeah.
The math checks out. Samir. They should have 10.
So the copy is what most people read at the front. It's twice the
Yeah.
moisturizer. Like, this is great. I agree with you. Copy is critical.
Okay,
I thought that was our first product placement, but then it went in a different direction.
that's right. We're not getting, you know, we're not getting any product placement dollars. I get the sense, by the way, that Samir, Ahmad, we're not gonna hear like a story from you guys, which is okay, by the way.
I've got one. It's just a bit long and a bit counter to actually everything that's been said.
Wait.
That's the right.
I actually wanted to provide not just a story, but another nugget.
No, I thought. Look, I'm not saying what you shared was not bad. We got a good discussion of it, but like, I felt like what we do well is we personalize our, like, part of what people like about us and part of what we get out of this is we make it personal. It's not just something we read. Right.
I'm sorry, DZ. I'm not ready to talk about my failures yet.
That's okay.
Do you want me to go, DZ? Because I've got a story. It's just
yeah. I mean, especially
it's a little different than everything that's been discussed so far.
That's perfect. Actually, that's exactly what we want.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So the very first company I ever PM'd for, and sorry for the history lesson here. There was a group at Microsoft called Media Room. And what these guys did was basically build an IPTV platform. Now, Microsoft, being the big company that it is, looked at the ARR on this division and saw that the resources were also competing with Xbox, which is crushing it. And they're like, I'm going to fucking nuke this thing. So they literally wake up one day and they're like, team is dead, find new teams. And the customers of this product called up the CEO of Microsoft. I learned all this later, by the way. And we're like, hey, like, you can't just kill this thing. Like, we have users who are using this product. Like, we need it. And so what they ended up doing was actually going back on killing it and selling the division to an ancient company called Ericsson. And if you don't know,
from the 90s, right? Like, this is ancient history.
Ericsson, innovative company, invented Bluetooth. Okay.
Oh.
But old as fuck. They're older than IBM. They are 150 years old. Okay.
And we know how Ahmad feels about age at this point.
That's horrible. Don't. He doesn't really feel.
All right, keep going. Sorry. Okay. You sold to Ericsson. Now it's part of Ericsson.
Something to all ages, just not in companies. Okay. So I joined a dinosaur, and I'm gonna foreshadow a bit here. Even when the product is great, even when the problem is there, even when the people are right, it could still come down to timing and just the organizational culture that you're in. And that's, I think, what happened with us. Like, fast forward the clock before every media studio and their grandmother decided to launch their own app. Back in 2015-ish. What we built was a way for, if you had content, right? Like, you had your 6 TV shows and 4 movies. We built a way that you literally just plug in your content and you can immediately distribute on Android set-top box, say any smart TV that you wanted, launch in the App Store. We basically built a app that could launch on any device that would load a browser that had a, just a straight up like Netflix style experience with swim lanes and profiles and all that stuff. So super innovative stuff. And the team that we were working with were like super legit, like some of the best engineers I've ever worked with. And, the TLDR of this is like, we were inside a company that basically all they did, 96% of their business was drill tunnels and lay wire between 2 cell towers, and then, sell that service to telcos like Verizon, et cetera. And we were like a 4% random thing in that company. And so the distribution, the power, the sway that we had in order to make that product successful, to continue to invest in it, it just never happened. It kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. They ended up selling the division again to an investment bank. But anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying, like, I think that product today would be very useful in this type of environment where, like, all of these different content providers are actually trying to build their own experiences.
Totally.
But wrong time, wrong place,
Wrong company.
wrong company. Yeah.
Yeah.
So many lessons here. I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah, a
lessons
lot.
of this.
Yeah. I mean, hang on. So wrong company is a really interesting one. I was thinking about this actually earlier today, but it's a thought I've had before too, which is if like HP came up with a tablet that was as beautiful and functional as the iPad, would it even have a shot, right? Like, do people think like HP?
Oh, there's a real example here. I mean, there's the compact iPad.
Right.
Right?
iPad. Yeah. Yeah.
It was
I
fine.
mean, you can claim that it was a timing thing or whatever, but all that aside, like even today, if like HP, created a pane of glass as beautiful as the iPad, would it have a real shot? I say no, because in people's minds, that's not what HP does.
But it's not just that. It's not what HP does. It's also like you can't just be as good as the iPad, right? You're
You gotta
going
be
up against the iPad.
Yeah.
You got to be
Yeah.
radical. So like if there's an incumbent in the market
Right.
that has quote unquote won this, and in tech, that's what happens, right? You tend to end up
Yeah.
with one product per category that wins. For you to come in, you got to be 10x better to get attention.
So that
Right.
uphill battle has two fronts, right? The product itself has to be much better, but branding, marketing, like
Totally.
just to
Yeah.
get someone to even
Yeah.
fucking try the thing has
Yeah.
to be like 3x more the investment than what Apple will do.
I mean, you look at this like, Apple comes up with a product, they don't even necessarily have it in stores and people are lining up outside to get it.
Yeah.
And then, Ericsson comes up with a media player or whatever. No one like it. It's like it's a tree falling and no one's there. Like, is there really sound? I think it's branding. It's positioning in people's minds about what the company does, and it's like a big part of the marketing story of that company. It just doesn't fit with what they do.
Totally. And but there's again, this is I'm so glad you told the story, Mark, because like there's so much coming out of this. Like, it's not just all those things you said are missing. Why are they missing? Well, they're missing because Ericsson doesn't care, right? Ahmad this is not on the top 3 list, the CEO, right? So you can't get the funding to do the brand marketing campaign. The good marketing people don't work on this because it's not good for their careers, right? So like,
Yeah.
it's a death spiral, right? And so in markets that are tough, if the team and company aren't really committed to going after it, it shows. Somebody will be. Somebody is out there, committing their life or their company's life to this. If you're just like, it's like that famous, it's like the idea of like, hey, let's just dangle our feet and see what happens. That doesn't work, right? Because there's somebody out there who's just like, I'm going to jump off the ship and I will swim to shore, and you can dangle your feet, but like, see you later.
Go ahead, Abby.
I think you see good examples of this. Like, I'll take my example from Disney with streaming, right? So like doing streaming at Disney 7 years ago was similar to Ahmad's story, right? Where it was like, this is not in the top 5, even 6, even top 10 priority. But doing streaming at Disney over the last 2 years, you are now the top priority, right? So I think if companies are forced to shift, the equation can actually change, right? Where like now you look at something like Disney Plus and it's actually a market leader, but it's because of the shift you saw in the company. Whereas before, you just couldn't get any traction no matter how hard you tried. So like, I think until a company's ready or until a company's back is to the wall, these challenges are real challenges.
By the way, I think one thing that if you're like building something, you're solving a problem, and you're like, I know this is a problem. I don't know why I'm not getting traction. I know it might be worth asking yourself, like, if I was a rogue startup building my own brand, building my own company, would I have traction? Like, could I actually get this product in front of users? And if the answer to that question is yes, then you've found a problem. You just the medium is incorrect.
Yeah.
Hey, sorry to go back on one thing real quick. By the way, I agree with that, Ahmad. That's some like we can talk about. Actually, one good pod would be what are good problems for big companies versus what are good problems for small companies. But Avi, I want to pick up something from what you just said, which is something changed inside Disney that caused this to go from Ahmad's media room to like number one item on the CEO's agenda, right? What was it, or who was it? What or was it outside the company? Was it? But what caused all of a sudden this to go from the bottom of the list to the top of the list? And now that they are committed, it feels like they're winning.
I mean, in my observation, it was Netflix, right? That you had somebody who really started winning at this and meaningfully winning over, essentially Disney's viewers and Disney's, and more importantly, Disney's ad dollars, to the point where if they failed to compete, their main source of revenue started disappearing. And so it became, I think that's why I described it as a back to the wall situation where, and I think this is especially tough for publicly traded companies. And even when they made the switch, which is arguably too late, it was still considered a very risky move, right? So even to present this to shareholders as we were going to pivot the strategy, the entire company was considered pretty radical at the time, despite the fact that at the time, it was obvious, like the trend lines were obvious as far as where ad dollars were going, where viewership was going, especially among younger generations.
Even now, there's controversy over some decisions, right? Like they launched Black Widow both on streaming and on theaters, and like you could tell that they're flip-flopping about was that the right decision or not.
Totally.
So even now, they don't know what to do.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, I think it's obviously said, existential threats.
Yeah.
Those are often the environments in which change that otherwise wouldn't be able to take traction actually becomes not just a priority, but the priority.
Or you die though, right?
Right.
Yeah. Most companies die, by the way.
Exactly,
I think that's the insight, which is if the environment is such that you can only take what is indeed a good idea, but not a priority, and make it your top priority when it's an existential crisis or threat, your chances of failure are very high at that point. It's kind of too late. You've already partially been disrupted.
Yes.
Or, you have a large business that still will produce a lot of cash, but you're not catching that next wave. And that's I think an environment in which successful products can fail. It's because of when it becomes a priority, even though the technology might be available, and like what the market forces are at that time, in which any product that you launch would have to succeed in. The bar is often higher at that point too.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that like companies, like an Ericsson, should have been devoting a meaningful part of their business in a meaningful way, right? Like truly supporting disruptive innovation, right? So like they should have been investing in what Ahmad was doing in a meaningful way. And had they done that, they actually would have been in a much better spot rather than falsely investing.
So here's my story. DZ, you wanted a story? Here's your story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Samir.
I worked on touch input for computers before the iPhone. Like before people would touch their phones, except with the stylus. I spent, a couple years on touch input for Windows XP.
Wow.
Now I'm like really dating I think it was like XP Service Pack 2 or something. So like, and it was like
Ahmad, do you know what these things are?
We'll put the show notes. We'll put this in show notes.
Somebody said like,
we'll send Wikipedia links.
It was like Windows XP tablet PC edition. And one of the things that comes to mind is the team was incredibly strong. People really cared. There was this feeling of innovation. No one bought tablet PCs like old school style on Windows XP. It was way too expensive. And, it was like a tack on. You would like tack it on to Windows, and none of the UI was, optimized around touch. They reuse a lot of what stylus input was about, et cetera, et cetera. And everyone thought it was going to be a hit product. Like everyone inside thought, look how much care we're putting into it. There's like 100 scenarios we're testing this with. We have like a hero application. We've done like developer outreach. We're Microsoft. Everyone
you got the playbook. You're throwing the playbook.
It's full, right? And then like I remember the iPhone launched midway during this journey. So I think it was like Windows 7 was like out and we were still working on it. And there was like, you looked at this thing and it was like, oh my God, it's so much better. Right. And it ties back into this idea of Microsoft's main business was, keyboard and mouse as the interface. And tablet PC was this like little division that was off to the side doing very innovative work, but never really had the remit to go and drastically change the UI, elements or design elements or even the overall interface of Windows. And then of course you can see that by the time they did, it was too late, right? Like Windows hasn't won on the touch side. And that's because by the time tablet PC or touch interfaces became the way people did it, they had already been disrupted for the most part by Apple and what they had done. And so there again lies this, story of partially timing, partially strategic importance to the company. It was not seen as an existential threat. There were no examples in the market that could easily be copied, for example, and chased. And by the time there were, it was too late. And so I think we're many of these stories have similar flavors of timing, strategic importance, et cetera, that probably there's a lot to learn from. And if we reflect on in the present now, we can probably identify some of these things that are red flags. DZ, I think you mentioned, right? There's cases where you knew things were not going to work out if only you had either paid more attention or acted on them, right?
Yep,
I mean,
that's right. Ahmad, you were going to say
So,
something.
yeah. So I had a question actually for Samir because, I don't know how old I was when he was working on this.
yeah, maybe
Or if
not
I
even
was
born.
even
Yeah.
born, maybe.
Yeah.
So is what I'm hearing that Apple solved the problem by thinking about it from like ground up, like, right? Like here's software specifically designed for this use case. Whereas with Microsoft, it's like, hey, random team over here, here's all of this existing stuff that you have at your disposal. Go innovate by meeting this use case, but still using all this shit.
Yeah, I think so. That's exactly
Baggage,
right.
right? The historical baggage.
There's the baggage. This is like, it reminds me of I think, what is it? One of Clayton Christensen's like books on how disruptive innovation works, right? It's like the folks that do disruptive innovation often don't meet all the use cases or all the features of, the incumbent. And they're initially looked upon like, but like the iPhone is not going to solve all of what Windows does. Windows is so powerful. Look at how many PCs it's on. This phone, while it's a great phone, isn't going to take over. And then, of course, that was just the beginning. And so part of it comes down to, did they at Apple have, this grounds up mindset where they were solving for this problem in the best possible way with the path to innovation, versus someone like Microsoft that was like, there's a large incumbent. They're riding the existing S curve. They're just trying to do a bolt on or tack on. And it's not even the same thing. But then you have this disruptor that gets better over time. And now you can basically do everything you can from your iPhone. And most people don't even have a Windows computer anymore. That to do something unique that they couldn't do with their iPhone.
Like this is a great pod. All of these things can use another hour, but like what you said is actually so like in retrospect, you're like, Ahmad, your retrospect analysis of the situation, I think, is spot on about why one was going to fail, one was going to succeed. But in the moment, in that time period, the opposite could be easily made an argument, right? Because like one of the things we talk about all the time today as we build products is, hey, take advantage of your unfair advantages, right? Like whatever gives you a leg up, gives you more access, gives you more scale, gives you more whatever. One of your ways to win as a product manager, one of your ways to build successful products is build the product, solve the solution, but like look inside yourself or look inside your company or whatever is adjacent to you, and take advantage of all the stuff that you have available to you. Take advantage of the stuff that the guy off the street cannot, right? And there's such a subtle difference between leveraging what you have to win versus being encumbered by what you have or beholden to
Being
what you have.
trapped.
Being
Yeah,
trapped,
being
right?
trapped by it.
But like,
Yeah, yeah.
but like that sounds so clear, and you can write down on a piece of paper. I would bet that if you go backwards in time, like the
Yeah.
difference between those two ideas, one is taking advantage and one is being trapped, feel almost identical, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
in fact, like I think it's very hard to argue that either Ahmad or Samir should have stepped away from the product they were working on. Right?
Right.
I think like at the time in the moment, it actually made a lot of sense. And so I wonder if that's what we're trying to solve. Like when should you step away? When should you stop
You
working
brought
on the
up the
product?
best. So one, I mean, we're getting long on time because this part is so great. But like one thing I've had in my head as you guys were talking through all this is like, it feels like everything, all of our failures could have turned around. So one argument, which is a bit extreme, but it's worth pondering, is like maybe products only fail when the PM gives up. When you mentally give up. Because like if you had changed to a different group of people, or you had tried a different technology solution, or like basically like it feels like your product and the discovery of a successful product is a jigsaw puzzle, and like changing any one piece can be the unlock.
I would disagree with
high
that.
school boxing. Oh, go ahead, Samir.
I would disagree with that. It gives too much importance to the PM.
Okay, good.
But I
Interesting.
think the how do you swap out time, right? Like
Yeah.
I think part of the issue is some of these things are 90% destined to fail from the start if you do an objective analysis.
Yes.
And I think a lot of people are lured by that 10% hope.
And
there's
title,
environments
and
a title and a promo and all this stuff, right? And guaranteed compensation, etc. There's examples where that 10% hope is the right bet to take, for example, in a startup environment. But in a incumbent where you're trying to extend the life of a dying S-curve, that becomes very, very hard to move meaningfully. And if analyzed objectively, I don't think there's anything anyone could do to save a product that's like trying to creep up more from a dying S-curve in some cases.
Yeah. Ahmad.
So Samir, I know for everybody listening to the podcast, Samir loves hosting or creating a culture with his PMs where he lets them know that they are the supreme dictators on the team and that they have full autonomous rights.
Right.
He doesn't share this with anyone else though, so
I only told this to Ahmad.
That's right.
Yeah, he said we're the CEOs of our products, right?
I did not. Do not troll me on this podcast,
Ahmad,
guys.
what's the insight? Tell us.
So I think one thing you said, DZ, that brought back memories. My high school boxing coach used to tell me that the moment that you have mentally given up, you have lost the fight. And the fight is actually less about a physical fight and more of a mental fight. Like, can you convince the other person that they've lost before they convince you? And I wonder if the same is true here for product teams, right? Like, I wonder if, if you have enough conviction to push through, like, yes, you launched a Surface that's no longer relevant, and now the iPhone's out, but like you were able to rally the troops to pivot, to iterate, to launch something that copies the iPhone. I wonder if it would have been a different story. Because what I imagine happens, and this is what happened in my experience, is like people mentally all flip a switch in their head that says, this isn't going anywhere. I'm gonna relax. I'm gonna coast. I'm gonna figure something else. I'm gonna play my next move.
Time for plan B, right?
And that's how that could be how products die. And one story I'll share, also from the same book. I'm plugging this book twice now.
Wait, what's the name? What's the name of this book?
Originals by Adam Grant.
Okay.
Great book. He talks about some girl in college who basically was trying to invent a way to electronically charge things at a distance. So your phone is here, but it can charge, even though like the thing is plugged in there, it actually can charge your phone. And every person on earth was telling her, like, you can't fucking do this thing. Like, it's impossible. Like, not a solvable problem. She has no engineering background, if I'm remembering this correctly from the book. But her conviction was so strong that she kept like just butting her head against these people. And basically she had invented a patent where it uses basically ultrasonic sound. And she ran through hurdles, right? Like, once she discovered, like, okay, she found some people were like, oh shit, this might work. And then then people got in there like, actually, this might not work. But this thing exists out in the world now, and like they're iterating on the technology and they're improving it, et cetera. But like, I think that is an example of someone who's no knowledge. To take your point earlier, DZ, like maybe a disadvantage of not knowing anything actually gives you the advantage of having enough conviction that it should exist.
Sometimes,
like it did with this girl. But yeah, honestly, I think like your mood and attitude about something definitely impacts it.
Yeah, I think so. And it's also environment, right? Like, were they doing it as part of their job in a large company? It's a different thing than I'm doing this as a science experiment for a very long time that I'm very passionate about.
Yeah.
So I think one of the swap outs in DZ's framework of jigsaw puzzle is swap out the operating environment. It's unsolvable at a large company. It's solvable in a lab.
Yeah, spin it out, right? Or spin out the team, like
right.
Like somebody to take a model example, somebody had to rally through the I think, by the way, I will undermine my own argument. I think where my argument doesn't hold, which is a product only fails when the PM gives up, or let's call it the team gives up, right? The product only fails when the team gives up. I think that doesn't hold in the situation where there's a timing aspect to success. When the market, like, if you are, and there are certain situations when the second place, there is no second place. There's first place and nobody, right? But that's not true. And there are situations like that in lots of verticals and products. But then there's lots of areas where you have infinite runway because it's a very hard problem. Like wireless charging is a legitimately hard problem, right? Like until the day somebody comes out, and until the day Apple comes out with a wireless charger that can charge my iPhone from over there, if that day happens, your product is dead, and you should walk away. But if that doesn't happen and you just have the wherewithal to struggle through all the reasons why it doesn't work and change out these pieces and keep at it, assuming it's a real problem, ostensibly you will eventually succeed, right?
DZ, that's your story reminded me of one thing that none of our examples talked on, which is if Apple comes up with X, your product will fail. It's this idea of a lot of products fail because of this single point of failure, right? Like you're dependent on someone else not doing something. Yeah. And a classic example is if 90% of your business relies on traffic being sent from Google, when they change their ranking algorithm,
yes,
those providers or those products just tank, the market price of the stocks tank or whatever. Like single point of failure
is a good example of this. Like it completely depends on search traffic.
Yeah, I mean, I remember once there was this Google earnings call that even mentioned something like Yelp as an example of one of the queries or results that change as a result of a query. And I can't remember if it was good or bad, but either way, the stock moved like in that direction drastically of his other company just from being mentioned in Google's earnings call. So this idea of single point of failure, depending on someone else doing or not doing something.
A single customer, a single platform.
A single customer.
Yeah. You're in big trouble.
Customers. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, guys, we covered so much. That was really actually fun to hear these different anecdotes. Let's spend like a short amount of time and do our usual carve-outs. Things that are top of mind, and then we'll wrap it up. Do I have to go first?
Why don't you go first? Why don't you go first?
Before you go, Samir, we're almost reaching the end of the episode, and no one knows where DZ went to school.
Oh yeah, hey,
I didn't know this would become a recurring bit.
Avi, thank you for bringing it up, Ahmad.
That's a great point, Ahmad.
I remember the first word. Avi, do you remember the last part of it? It's Massachusetts something. Do you remember what it is?
Yeah, Institute, Ahmad.
Okay. What is it about?
I think there's a tech in there.
Hey, technology.
Yeah.
Thank you for MIT.
Yes.
MIT.
Yes.
Oh
that's
my
what I-
goodness.
That's what I
We have an MIT grad with us.
Killing me.
Great-
TZ, you
gracing
can
us.
go now.
Killing me. Okay, I'll do a quick carve out. We're gonna have this conversation every week. It turns out. Okay, so one thing I mean, my carve outs seem to be a little philosophical, and this week is no different. So one of the things we're doing some reorgs at work, very typical for large companies these days. Nothing too drastic, but one of the things I've just been trying to, again, just keep in mind, not even like make a decision on, just like sort of keep in mind, is the difference between the difference between thinking of something as happening to me and thinking of something as happening for me, right? It's just to take whatever event is happening in your life, right? That's out of your control. Just that perspective of do I think of this thing as happening to me? Oh, this reorg is happening to me, as an example. Or do I perceive this as, hey, this thing is happening for me? And again, I think both are true, by the way. This is one of those things where like there's not a right answer here, but I've just been trying to keep that in mind of this is happening for me, not happening to me.
DZ, was this your carve out last time too?
No, last time was about the difference between saying I am angry and I feel anger.
Oh, okay. These are okay.
I think it was similar. I think it was similar to mine though. I think mine was there is no good news or bad news. It's just news.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah, very
Yeah.
similar. Very similar.
This is very meta, guys. I'll go with mine. I've been thinking, I recently started a new job at Pinterest. It's been about a month now. Well, it's my job. It's where I am. It's what I love. This can't be as a similar every episode topic. Like,
we're gonna make this happen. Samir,
That's up to you, really.
Yeah,
but one of the things I've been thinking about is org structures, and this idea of should you align by strategic objective or should you align by engineering team? And there's so many different ways to carve this out. Alignment with engineering and product is tighter in one bucket where you're part of the pieces that engineering builds. The trade-off there is that any strategic objective needs to then get managed across those teams. PMs have less agency over a strategic part of the company or a goal that needs to be met. Then there's the opposite, which is having a very clear team mapped to something big and ambitious that we need to achieve. The problem there is that team now needs to span with 4 or 5 engineering teams, and that becomes hard. So there's no easy answer, but it's been on my mind, and I'm trying to come up with the hybrid model, which is going to be a compromise, but it's going to be a compromise that gets me a little bit more than any one of those arrangements originally would have got. And so I'm trying to design it. I think org structures really determine success of the team, of the product to a large part. And so I want to make sure I do it right, both for the product, but also for the people. That's on my mind.
Day-to-day happiness. I would argue day-to-day happiness is largely
100%.
a function of your org structure. Okay.
100%.
Awesome. Ahmad.
Do you want to go next or should I?
Yeah, sure, I can go.
All right.
So something that's been on my mind a lot is that, and I'd be curious, honestly, to hear this answer at some point from you guys, especially people who are further out in their career, like years, centuries out. Samir,
just because I have gray hair, you can't say that.
No, just kidding. I feel like when my career first started off, I was learning a fuck ton, just like continuously learning so much. And I feel like when you're in an office or you're in a new environment, like that's like, you definitely get that learning. But even when you're still at that office or you've had that job for a while, like that tapers out. I'm curious, like things that have been on my mind is like, how do you kind of keep that learning curve up as a PM more generally? And then like, I don't know, just in your jobs, or have you guys like reached the point where you're like, I don't learn shit anymore. I'm just on autopilot. But anyway, that's all my thoughts. We should cover that in another.
Yeah.
podcast.
How do we?
Yeah, I think
it's a great pod. That would be a great pod. How do we
That's
continue
definitely
to learn?
episode worthy. I like that. All right, I'll close it out. I've been thinking a lot about chaos and just
Ooh.
there are moments I've noticed in the cycle of a product where everything seems like it's in chaos. And I think the naive instincts think that things have gone wrong, and sometimes they have. But more often than not, if you're willing to embrace chaos for a second, the ship kind of rights itself, and chaos actually leads to good things or insights or discovery. And I think it's just being able to hold on through chaos for about a month or so before things come back together again, and just kind of having the intuition that it will, or kind of pushing through chaos. And I notice that's true about life as well, right? So like there are also moments of chaos in life where similar things happen, where, you know, if you just kind of let chaos happen and embrace the chaos, things kind of come back together again. And so I've just been thinking about like how to do that better, not to assume that when there's chaos, it's because something has gone terribly wrong, but to say that this is just things coming back together. I don't know if you guys experience this in your product, or it's just I build chaotic products.
That's a great point and thought, Avi. It kind of reminds me of like, what doesn't kill you will make you stronger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To be honest, once you have like 3 kids, it's just full-time chaos. So I'm not even sure I can distinguish. Like, I'm not sure what the pre-chaos world was like.
It's great. I'll tell you. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, Ahmad's like,
yeah, we should do an episode on that.
Okay, guys, thoroughly enjoyed our deep dive into this topic. Episode 5 in the books, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
See you next week.
See you guys.